2006 we're cleaning up, sir. I hope this Parliament will support it.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, I want to first of all acknowledge and thank the Minister for his contribution. I know he feels really strongly about that, but I feel slightly resentful at the insinuation that he made that Labor doesn't support a safe regulatory regime in the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers, because he knows that's not true. He knows that it's not correct that we support safety regulation, and had he read the committee's report, perhaps he would have had some inclination of the solutions that we saw going forward. It is a very divided sector, and that in itself is pretty unhealthy, and I frankly don't think that the Minister's contribution has assisted towards any other way but it remaining divided. I don't think that's the leadership position that may have been taken, but obviously the Minister decided to barrel ahead with that. I want to also acknowledge and thank the Minister for giving the Select Committee more time than he originally had. It just took one request and he immediately granted it, and that was really helpful for us. The original proposal was that we have our briefing, although we weren't able to get advisors because you can't request advisors until you meet. So we had to first of all meet, then ask for advisors, and that immediately was granted. Then we got our briefing. Then we would hear submissions from a small range of individuals, and then we deliberate all at one meeting, and we were a bit concerned about that, given that even though it's a pretty straightforward issue in terms of what's being addressed, it isn't straightforward because of the complexity within the sector, and we were trying to get it right, not add to the mistakes that have been made in the past. The Minister is also correct in saying that when this legislation was originally introduced, it was the intention to have this offences and disciplinary fee funded in the way that the board continued. But he is incorrect in saying that everyone thought that was the case. If they had, there would not have been an issue raised with the Regulations Review Committee and then subsequently with the Ombudsman. So we've had quite a lot of time actually realising that these actions are not within the scope of the legislation. So the board understood from the Regulations Review Committee report and then the subsequent Ombudsman's report that this was outside their jurisdiction. What the Minister is asking us to do in this legislation is basically leave aside that from both the Ombudsman and the Regulations Review and say, well, that was the intention, therefore we should validate it. Well, from the perspective of the people who took the complaint, they feel justifiably grumpy about that. They followed proper process. They went to the Regs Review, they went to the Ombudsman and said, we don't think the law allows this, and both the Regs Review and the Ombudsman came back and said, that's correct, it doesn't. So this is the way to fix it, but it doesn't acknowledge the unfairness that those people felt, nor does it engage with the proper process that they went through. They went to those two organisations, Regs Review and the Ombudsman, and I think it's quite a big step to ask Parliament to just ignore the fact that for this considerable length of time, though that fee and levy have been imposed outside what has been known to be the scope of the legislation. So it may be a little group. If it's so little, it's surprising that it's going to bankrupt the board, as the Minister has indicated. And it's also a little surprising that the Minister says, even though it was outside the law, we wouldn't possibly go to the Minister of Finance and ask for a one-off appropriation so that the fees that were collected illegally could either in part or in full be paid back to the members who paid that levy and fee. So the proposal that I'd like, the Minister's asked us to think about it, and I'm happy to do that actually, but what I'd propose to the Minister is that he think about a better engagement with the sector. This is not a group of people who we want to be disengaged from the legislative process. They should be supportive of it. They're clearly not supportive of the board, and I wouldn't advise changing the board because we've tried that a couple of times. That clearly didn't work, but I do think that the board could be more accountable and transparent, and actually the Select Committee members made that point directly to them, and they took that on the chin, and my reading of what they said back to us was that they would they would do that. They understood that part of the frustration that's felt in the sector is the lack of accountability and transparency in regard to the board's action. So they collect money, and people that they collect it from don't really feel confident about what they're using it for. So better transparency, I think, would improve the situation. This matter should be better resolved going forward. The legislation is a bit of a blunt object, really. It's a bit of a sledgehammer approach. It doesn't offer any possibility of a fairer way of setting the levies and fees in the future, and that's another one of the concerns that the many plumbers, gasfitters and drainlayers who have communicated with us have said. There have been other examples in other industries that they say would be a fairer way of collecting the money, and I do think that the Minister again could over the weekend, I presume we're going to have this bill back before the House early next week, he could over the weekend look a bit more broadly about other ways of collecting that money. Mr Speaker, as the Minister alluded to, my colleague Raymond Ho has proposed an amendment. It is that a percentage of the monies be repaid to the affected parties, but it does allow for an opportunity for agreement to be reached between the various parties in this discussion, and then offers the opportunity that if agreement cannot be reached on the level of repayment, it's somewhere between 0 and 100%, if agreement cannot be reached on that, then the Chief Ombudsman would make a determination, and that seems to me to be a pretty sensible way forward. It would recognise that the aggrieved parties who took the complaint in the first place have had some recognition of that. They haven't just had Parliament trample over their victory, if you like, because that's what they saw it as. They saw that they had taken their complaint through a proper process, and it had been agreed to, actually. Both the Regulations Review Committee and the Ombudsman said, yes, you're right, and then recommended a way forward. So they feel as if, having achieved this victory in terms of having the illegality of the fee and levy recognised, they're now just being ignored. Well, that's not a good way to treat people who have gone through a proper parliamentary process. So the suggestion that has been made in the supplementary order paper is that an alternative approach is made. The end outcome would be the same in terms of the safety of the industry, which, from what I heard from the Honourable Maurice Williamson, is his primary concern. That would be unanimous in this House. Nobody wants cowboys operating in such a critical sector, and there must be some method for the board to call cowboys to account. What Labor is saying is that this way is not the only way, and certainly may not be the fairest way. The industry doesn't support it wholeheartedly. We've had, as I'm sure members of the House have had, a lot of correspondence on this matter. No, actually, from a wide range of people, actually, and my constituency colleagues will attest to the fact that their electorate officers have had a lot of visits as well, and I'm sure that in the Pakuranga electorate there would have been one or two plumbers who tried to get an appointment with the Minister, but perhaps he was pretty overloaded in his timetable. I'm sure he's a busy electorate member of Parliament. So, Mr Speaker, this has been a rushed process, but I think we've had the goodwill of every committee member. We, for example, decided not to call for additional submissions, but we considered the correspondence that we had received to the Select Committee on this matter. We treated them as submissions, so all members not only read them, but we discussed them rigorously as well. The advisers on this legislation have been very hard-working and very attentive to the concerns that have been raised. They may have been a little frustrated at some time that we wanted to try and get a better resolution. They had a clear mandate to progress this bill, but I think they gave us considered and rigorous advice, and all members of the Select Committee have put quite a lot of effort into it. It's a pretty unhappy situation, though, when you have such an important issue being the cause of such controversy and lack of agreement within Parliament. Who knows? We may well decide that over the next few days before the House next considers this, that we will be able to get a fairer resolution, and a resolution that the sector buys into. That would be my preferred outcome, Mr Speaker, and I certainly hope we can achieve that over the coming few days.
Chris Hockenvold.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I rise to speak in favour of the Plumbers, Gasfitters